Claudia, hi, it's Olena. I've been reporting from the suburbs of Ukraine's capital, Kiev, from Irpin. Perhaps you've heard the name of my town in the recent days and the news. It has been pretty much because here in Irpin, Bucha, Vorzel, Hostomel, there has been severe fights in these recent days, but the enemy was stopped here and was not allowed to head for the Kiev, at least from this direction. We don't know, of course, if the situation is going to change in the recent hours and in the recent days, because our intelligence has already reported that there have been more than 300 tanks massed up on the borders with Ukraine from the side of the Belarus, that is now actively taking part in this war on the side of Russia, of course. So these tanks are going also to cross the border in the recent hours or days and head for the Kiev from this northern borders of Ukraine. So the situation is changing very, very easily, very fast, and in hours, sometimes in the minutes. Well, I'm reporting from the corridor. It's the only room in my house that doesn't have any windows, and it's important because during the night hours, when there are dark hours, and during the curfew that begins after 5 p.m., we aren't allowed to switch on the lights in our houses, because as our local government says, as our territorial defense units ask us not to do that, because our houses can be the aim for the enemy, and they can attract too much attention. So it's very important to follow these rules. And of course, during this curfew, it lasts until, if I'm not mistaken, until 7 or 8 a.m. We aren't allowed to leave our houses. Of course, for people that that have to go to the bomb shelters, they are allowed to leave their homes in case of need, but yet in the recent days it has been, today and yesterday, it was pretty calm here, and the nights are pretty calm, but of course we don't know how this time it's going to be this night and what's going to happen tomorrow, for example. But the day before yesterday, as it was, the day was pretty hard. We heard here the constant shelling, the bombing, and it is of course psychologically very very hard, because there are no fights here in Irpin, and there were no fights here in Irpin, only on the borders of Irpin, on the suburbs of my town, but at the same time some rockets have landed on people's houses here, not very far from my home, and that means that people lost their homes at once, and it's absolutely terrible to understand. Of course, it is the hardest situation now in Ukraine is in Kharkiv, in Sumy, somewhere on the south of Ukraine, especially. The whole day we've been following the news from Kharkiv. Perhaps you've heard this also. It is the second biggest city in Ukraine. In 20th century it used to be also the capital of Ukraine before Kiev, and now we see how Kharkiv is the sign how Putin is losing this war, because he was not successful in his plans for blitzkrieg here in Ukraine. He hoped to take Kiev in just 2 days, and he was not successful to do that, and now we notice that Putin's troops are so, on the one hand, they are very demoralized totally. On the other hand, they are getting totally mad, and they have been firing, they have been bombing the peaceful quarters of the peaceful cities, and that means that the great amount of civilians have been suffering from this war. They feel this war on their own, and it's something absolutely terrible. Over these days, there are dozens of killed and injured people in Kharkiv, and especially terrible is that among them there is several children. The similar situation is also in several Ukrainian cities, and it's very hard to realize the full scale of the damage that have been made over these just 6 days, and we aren't sure how long it's gonna last. There are some hope for the negotiations that started yesterday. For example, you know that on the border of Belarus and Ukrainian and Russian delegations met and tried to negotiate over some issues, how to de-escalate the situation. To be honest, we don't know pretty well what are the consequences and what are the results. We don't know any details of these negotiations, how they went, are there any progress, but perhaps there is still some progress, because the new rounds of these negotiations are going to continue in the nearest days. Of course, it's very important, but it is very hard for me to understand what this compromise is gonna look like. What sounds very good for Ukrainians over these days is, of course, the international support, the readiness of the different countries like Germany, like Finland, that never in their history used to give any any weapons to other countries. Now they are ready to help Ukraine with the weapons, with the extremely important weapons for us. So it's a very good and very important side. What also is very important, the decision of the European Parliament today to claim that Ukraine is now a member candidate for the EU membership. So it's the very good sign for Ukrainians, because it is understandable that Ukraine now understands. The world now understands, and the EU particularly understands, that Ukraine is the part of the European family, and it's the country that fights for its freedom, and it makes it so valuable to other countries. This sign of the country that is ready for anything to fight for the security here in Ukraine, and of course we are fighting now for the security of the whole Europe. It's very important, because in the beginning of the war, before the war, it seems to me none of us fully understood that this full-scale invasion is pretty possible, is so realistic. And now when we are living here, we just showing the example for other countries that the war could be inevitable for many countries. Even if you think you are very far from Russia, if you think you are very far from any country that is a clear aggressor. So the invasion can happen any minute. The full-scale war can begin any minute, and for Russia, any principles of the international law, of the democratic law, mean absolutely nothing. But of course, another good sign for us is when we are following the news that Russia is now in a complete isolation, in a cultural isolation, in a sport isolation. Of course, in economic, first of all, it's the most important part of the sanctions that have now been implemented towards Russia. It is very important for us to understand that the whole world understands the threat that Russia presents for Ukraine and for the whole world. So it's very important, of course, for us to understand. There are so many things I would like to tell you, but for me it's now very hard to concentrate. I'm a bit tired over these days because you're always on a high alert, and the hardest part of that, you're following the news 24/7, and the biggest part of this news is a raid. Everyone is has now to follow to the bomb shelter, and it's very hard to read this news for example, in Kiev and in Kharkiv and in some other cities, these warnings have been happening every hour, every 2 hours. So I fully understand that many of my friends, many of my colleagues that, for example, stay here in Kiev and aren't going to leave the city until it is very highly needed. They just do not go to these bomb shelters, they just stay in their homes in some more or less safe place and continue to do their work as far as we are working, as far as we are trying to help our country with anything we can do. We're trying to do that, and as far as there is, for example, light, electricity, internet, and connection in my home, I'm ready to work. I'm ready to do what I can do for my country, at least to continue to work. Well, to be honest, I thought today that it's pretty hard for me to remember how my life and the life of my family, my ordinary life was before this 6 days of war. But it seems to me that it's pretty easy for me to imagine how we will live further after, of course, our victory. I don't know when it's going to happen, of course, but we fully believe that it will be a victory for Ukraine, because there is no